And with that, it's another Thursday. And this is the first Not Playing Politics of 2021. I'm glad we have nothing to talk about today, and it's been very quiet since the new year. Nick, how you doing?
Right out of the gate, we are off to I tell you what I'm proud of. I'm proud of that. Before our show tonight, I want to thank our fans. The boards were lighting up with comments and people being engaged. And, we had a concern of coming back after 2 weeks absence of two shows, of thinking, let's get a hold of this. We want to turn this into something. And we've already got people engaging online and coming to it. So it tells me that there's not only an appetite for discussion out there, but it tells me that there is engagement out there. And I appreciate that. That's what I'm going to look forward to for the silver lining of all the shenanigans is the engagement and the topics that we're going to cover.
Yeah. I think so far my favorite meme, though, is some guy basically kicking back. And he's got his glass raised and says, well, that was a fun 5 days. Here's to 2022.
You see them for a long time. You see a lot of people, and the meme that everyone is already going to know is the one that I just picture, like a calendar that says 2020, another one sitting there and it just says, I can see it. I don't know if it's out there, but I can just see it where it's just 2021, and someone says, man, nothing could be as crazy as 2020, and 2021 just says, hold my beer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure someone's already made it, but let's get into it. As we talked about in pre-production, let's share it with our family and friends out there. Let's do it. Let's have the talk.
All right.
What do we do?
Well, first of all, let's take a moment to say howdy to the good people and not so good people who are watching us live. Cheese Freak Ginger Snap, we are glad to see you here. Stephen Buck, Mr. D Knuckle, I'm watching you carefully. A Salty One, glad you're here. A Brunson, I'm very happy to see you.
Yeah. And to a lot of our friends and family out there listening, I know, and I may come back to this. We do have friends and family joining us from the Sunshine State of Florida. And I see a Curtis McDonald, I hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly, joining us. Very much looking forward to engaging them, and to all of our fans that we can't see, that aren't necessarily on the board yet. Thank you all for joining us.
Or watching on replay, obviously.
Sure. And for those that watch also from many different places or tune in on different devices, we appreciate it. I think this year is going to frame itself that what we wanted to do is not only take on the topics of the day. You can get that anywhere. There's 100 different podcasts doing it. But really what we want to do is create a special lane that we engage our listeners, and that we try to provide a channel or at least an idea of what we think. I spent some time today talking to family and really just trying to gain some perspective back from different types of conversations and people, and just see what's going on out there. And I think, for you, Alex, I think the feeling out there for some people is shock and awe. I think for others, I'll be honest. I got feedback from others. It was like, you know what? It's darn time. It's 4 years past what they felt was being too long. That they had been that finally the voice was being raised. So there are a lot of opinions out there, and I will tell you this: there was no shortage of emotion tied to it.
Yes, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, let's be honest here. What happened yesterday, and let's take it piece by piece, right? Because there was a lot of bad that happened yesterday. For me personally, what I was looking forward to, I didn't have any magic belief that Mike Pence was going to be like, I'm the vice president, and I am going to just reject the ones I don't like and only choose the electors I do like. Like, we knew that wasn't going to happen. That's not who Mike Pence is. But I thought he would at least say, okay, we have the objectors. They've been able to present their evidence. This is legitimate evidence. I want this 10-day period by which we can go through and actually adjudicate this information. Is it real? What's fake? What's true? Do these states actually have the evidence to actually say, hey, this was all legitimate, all in the up and up, everything's fine? Let's actually have that heard, because up to this point, it has not been heard by a court of law. That's all anyone really wanted, was to say, hey, let's actually look into this. Let's see what's true, what isn't. Let's get it adjudicated so we can then come to an answer. That didn't even happen. When Pence was like, I'm not even going to do that, he basically just said all of these objections, all of these things are just not going, they're going to be heard, but basically not really heard, because it's just going to be on the floor. It's not. He's just in there straight up telling you, I'm not fighting for anybody. Nothing is going to happen. So that's gut punch number one. Then number two, we have the storming of the Capitol building, which is, for me, an emotional gut punch, because we don't turn violent. We're not supposed to be turning violent. But for weeks leading up to this, Nick, I mean, we've had these conversations. I said multiple times, we're not being, without us being heard, without, with all the suppression of real news, of real information that's going on by Google and Facebook and the mainstream media, with the violence that is being acted out in our streets against conservatives, against churches. All of this is coming to a head, and they're not leaving anywhere but violence to occur. And yesterday was just that. I fear is that first spark of what not even conservative, but those on the right. What does this, that this may be that first spark of violence that I'm really hoping we can avoid, because I don't see any good way out of it.
While you were speaking, I was thinking in my mind about Lexington and Concord, and then Fort Sumter, and I, the differences of what brought about those events in our country's history. Lexington and Concord, of course, being the shot heard around the world with regard to the start of the Revolutionary War, which was to an external aggressor. And then, of course, Fort Sumter as one of the early battles of the Civil War, which, pitted brother against brother. I want to tell our friends and family and our fans out there listening, I haven't fully formulated and digested all of this, and I'm not going to pretend to. And just because I try to keep up with current events, and just because we have a podcast, and just because I somewhat try to make myself a rationalized human being to look at things, I'm going to think about this for a while. I think that it warrants that kind of time. I certainly have emotional responses to it. I certainly have personal feelings about it, but I'm trying to rationalize them and understand them. And the one thing that I can say that I feel right now is that very randomly does one massive event take place without any sense of warning. Whether it was the Titanic that was getting ice reports and steamed ahead anyway, to years of petition that was being made by the colonies to the crown about, redress of grievances. It wasn't like Lexington and Concord was just some random of the historical. I mean, there was events taking place before it.
Right. There's a very, very long windup.
Sure. The fall back to that of the attack on Fort Sumter and the first battle of the Civil War. Like it wasn't a couple of guys got into some fisticuffs and the next thing you know, there are 500,000 dead Americans at the end of a bloody Civil War. What I'm trying to get to is that I think when taken out of context in an immediate snapshot, you look at what happened yesterday and you're getting this narrative of, oh my gosh, the world is on fire. I can't believe this would have ever happened in a million years. And then you flip it and you ask yourself the question, for people out there, and I'm not saying that it includes anybody that I know, I'm not calling anyone out, but whether you agree or disagree, I think we can acknowledge the perspective that for many people, there has been an assault on them, what they feel that they've been told for years that their president was illegitimate from day one. They were told that because they supported their president, they were racist, they were sexist, they were xenophobic, they were homophobic. The word now being generated that you can see and being picked up in some of the news channels is cult. It's the cult of Trump, what they're following. I'm not here to defend and define the words. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to simply identify the fact that even when we use the term, like I was using it earlier today, well, we threw a match, it hit the tinderbox, and boom, it went off. Very rarely does a single event take place in time without there being some type of cause or indication. And the more dramatic the event, the longer that cause has been in the hearts and minds of people. I think for years people felt we had a president that was impeached for reasons that they couldn't understand. Not because they were ignorant, but because they said, why did this happen? How did he violate the law? Secondly, they felt that they were told for a long time that they were racist or unintelligent. And you're seeing comments like that now. There was a comment coming out from a media producer. I won't give the name of the person who said it. It's simple to Google, but what they basically said was, well, now all these Trump supporters can leave their siege of downtown Washington, D.C. and go back to the Olive Garden and the Garden Marriott Inn Hotel. And it was like, you're not even going after the people that were partaking in this. You're going after the middle class. You're slamming someone because of what they're doing is using a comment so they can write them off as, oh, you're so basic. I get why they did it. I just feel like it's salt in the wound, and I think that after enough time, enough people felt like this election was fraudulent. From their perspective, they see it as completely fraudulent. They feel that this is their last chance to stand against it, and let's hold everything accountable here. They are looking to their president to inform and support. And a lot of the calls coming from the president, if you listen to some of the language, and I've had pushback from people that I know about this, that you may not use the word incite, but there, if you listen to the rally that took place beforehand, there's some charged language going on about, well, this is how the courts let us down. And it became that call. Hey, we're all alone in this. This is how the courts let us down. This is how the media's out to get us. Big tech's out to get us. And I think some people just said, that's it. And the part is, these people, had they chosen to, they identified the weaknesses in the security of the Capitol building. And you better believe that there are people right now that are reconsidering their security strategy about that building. So I just want to end by saying, once again, I think that the thought that I turned on the news and saw this striking image, and it was very striking. But for that to happen and then be presented of, we don't get where all these crazy people just went nuts and started attacking this. I'm not commending them. I'm not saying that they're patriots or tyrants. I'm simply saying it's ignorant from my point of view. It's ignorant for me as a person to look at what happened and say, I just have no idea why anybody would ever take such a reaction. I think it's tragic that we had a loss of life. In particular, that one of the people that was lost was not only a service member, but to read some of the reports, to be shot and killed under the conditions that were presented. I haven't seen enough of the news coverage to justify why deadly force was used against this person. But there's so many things going on. My concern, and like I said, I need more time for this to kind of bake in my easy bake oven of a brain. And that is simply to say, very rarely does a major event like this take place without there being massive pressure and time behind it.
So I really want to play off because there's a third real major disappointment, but I want to continue your thought on that. Because it's something that is often lost. So, Mr. DeNuckle, just to answer your question at the beginning from earlier, was this real violence or was this all Antifa? Here's the thing: there are some claims that there was Antifa present. I think there's one or two photographs that indicates, because one dude very clearly has a hammer and sickle tattoo. For me, would it be, I think, logical to assume that a few people in that crowd were Antifa, yeah, I think that's logical. But I think the vast majority were people on the right. They were Trump supporters. A lot of people who were there have said the same thing. Now, that having been said, let's go back to what Nick was talking about. One of the big things that everyone likes to jump to is the Boston Tea Party, right? They're like, well, see how we were revolutionary? We were like, the king was like, we're going to tax you. And we're like, we're not going to be taxed. Let's go throw some tea into the harbor. And they assaulted. It's like, this is who we are. No. That is a huge misnomer. There were literal years and years and years of letters and negotiating, pleading, making pleas for it to be heard. Like, this was a long time coming. And then when it actually occurred, all of the prominent founding fathers actually condemned the action and actually made recompense to the East India Tea Company, because they said it was wrong for their private property to have been destroyed. The founding fathers did not like the Boston Tea Party because they felt that it was inappropriate to have someone's personal property destroyed in this way. The fact that we have let me phrase it. So the fact that there was a response. In fact, let me even take it one step further. This is why I don't like protests. The reason I do this show is because I don't like protests. I don't find them particularly useful. In the history, I know this sounds very counter to everything we've ever been taught, but when you look at the history of political change and political movement, we have protests, we have these things, but it seems the real change comes from things like this: long form conversations, books that are written. You change the minds of people and you change the world. Most protests, what you have are people together, the emotions get ramped up, and violence almost always ensues. What is unique to the vast majority of protests that have occurred on the right is that there isn't violence unless it's being exacted upon those on the right. This has literally never happened in the history of modern America. And again, once you go back more than 50 years, a lot of these political ideologies, they've changed radically in a lot of ways. So at least in the modern age, we have never seen those on the right behave violently like this. Now, was it still a crestfall? Because I thought as soon as it happened, I'm like, well, this is the fig leaf that they need, that those on the left will need to condemn everyone and do what we're seeing right now. Yeah, that was my big fear. But like you said, was there a part of me that's like, yeah, this is what's going to happen? Well, again, I've been saying this was going to happen for a while. You can't suppress people and expect them not to react. And it's not just they felt like the election had been stolen from them. We know it. I mean, let me phrase that. No, there has been no adjudication of grievances. No one with authority has actually sat down. There's not been a public hearing of these events, of the evidence that has been gathered mostly by amateurs in many cases, and those with very limited resources. What you have is a group of people, up to, in some counts, maybe even over 80, if some of these other claims are correct, but definitely 70 million plus people who, for the last, if we want to just stick with the era of Trump, for the last 4 years, have been physically abused. They've had, like you said, they've been maligned in the media. Our First Amendment rights have been substantially pulled away. But I really point out the level of violence that has been leveled against churches and those on the right, and combined with the sheer, I don't even have the right word for it. The fact that we've allowed the politicians have allowed the left to destroy billions of dollars of property, murder people, and no one gets punished for it. No one goes to jail for it. It's allowed and it's apologized for by the media, by the politicians. It's too much. There's too much there for people to just kind of look at this and say, okay, we just got betrayed. And this is the thought a lot of people had. They got betrayed by Pence. And they're like, okay, that's it. We're done. And even at that breaking point, I do need to point out that there were hundreds of thousands of people, upwards of 1 million, maybe even more than 1 million of people outside that Capitol building. Less than 200 people actually stormed it. The vast majority of people still did not want to be violent. Now, the third point on all of this, I think the third gut punch, at least for me, was because of this one event having so many Republicans turn around and say, well, since there was this event, we're just not going to contend anymore. We're just going to accept everything as is. That was, I think, even worse than what Pence did, because I could kind of understand why Pence did what he did. I didn't agree with it, but I can understand it. But then to have them say, yep, we stand with the people, to have these congressmen and senators say, originally, we stand with the people, because this needs to be heard, this needs to be adjudicated. I want to speak for my constituents. And then this event happens, and they're like, nope, I'm done speaking for my people. My constituents can go F themselves. That's what I heard. That hurt me more than anything else.
Well,
what about you?
I think a consideration that also has to be made when you look at an event of this size, scale, scope, and the way it's going to be kind of interpreted. And let's be honest, narratives are going to be drawn in all directions, and unfortunately, it's probably going to be drawn in two directions. But the point that I'm getting at is, if you think about an event like this at the size and scope and just the magnitude of what's been going on, the question you have to ask is, what secondary and tertiary collateral events and effects can we think about and expect? Many times, liberty is what's sacrificed for increased security, right? If you don't think that's the case, look at the way that they've handled COVID. The solution to most things was locking down by governors, by the federal government at one point, or at least the discussions on what to do, on how to do it. And so we have to consider, number one, a lot of these things are going to be amplified in the COVID world, because I think that being locked up for a year, I think people, you get outside and it's just, I mean, I legitimately believe that it acts as a great agitator for nothing else. I've spent almost no time, and for friends of the show and family that know me, as you may have noticed, I'm slightly extroverted. And right. It's a little bit foggy in London. It's a challenge, even for me, when I go outside sometimes and I go grocery shopping, for example, and you just look at other people, and not that I believe that there's this fear of COVID, that we don't have an immune system, that we can't be healthy, whatever, but there's just an air out there of like, every person you see is the walking enemy. And I don't want to live like that. I don't want to live like that at all. So I think COVID has created a psychology that may take us a little bit to readapt to coming out of, and hopefully that'll happen as soon as possible. But I think that certainly didn't contribute to a more pleasant environment for any of this to take place. Secondly, I think that the concept of considering secondary and third level effects to this is going to be what's going to happen. I think what you're already starting to see is, with regard to what you just said, which is that of censorship. It just came out, a news story's coming out now for those that are tracking it. Senator Josh Hawley out of Missouri was one of the first people to say that he was going to contest the electoral results. And at the time it was, oh, he's this, young senator, the voice, we're going to do it. It's great. Let's see what happens. Well, now Simon & Schuster, the big publishing company, has now backed out of publishing his book because they feel, with regard to the decisions that have been made, and they can't in rightful conscience do this. So now the narrative that's going to be made, in similar to what we're seeing some of our people write, we're seeing people write things on the page right now. Mr. D. Knuckle talked about, big tech killing Trump's Twitter and Facebook feeds. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg personally posted on Facebook. I saw it. So I see where you're coming from. He independently posted on his page that the president's account on Facebook will now indefinitely be suspended. Now the defense to that could be, hey, this is an independent corporation, they can do whatever they want. Sure, but when you're playing the role of walking that line that we've talked about on this show, I believe, with regard to being a publisher versus a platform, you got to be careful. Again, let's be mindful. I mean, the Ayatollah has posted things, and I don't know if they've been removed, but we'll see. But those second and third level effects, and now you're going to start to see things that are going on. So here's the reason that it has a little bit of a sting. Senator Josh Hawley, a young senator, came to be one of the first voices in contesting from the Senate side to support, because you need a senator to support when there's a House member that brings up this action. He was one of the first ones. His book is about the tyranny of big tech. His book is not Donald Trump has been treated badly by a bunch of meanies, let's storm the Capitol. His book is about the tyranny of big tech. But they're going to come from the perspective, and this is something that I was listening to on another show, and it was an interesting point. What they said was this. They said, look, policy-wise, very few voters are going to be informed to the level that they're really going to move on that. Even when Donald Trump came to the platform, most people in 2015 were like, it's Trump's monetary policy that I'm all about. Trump knew how to tap into the zeitgeist of the populist movement and those who felt culturally and socially they had been, exiled. I think where you're going to see that's going to be the part is that even if the votes go the way they are in the Senate, if Manchin holds and says he won't throw over the filibuster, then the Biden administration really won't be able to get any major ticket items across the line. But where they can push very heavily is if they pick up where the Obama administration left off with regard to socialized, and not socialized medicine, but social programs. And I think what you're going to see is things like this now. We are not going to publish it's cancel culture. We're not going to publish your book. Not because we don't think that it's a credible book, but we don't want the backlash that will come from the keyboard warriors upon this show or upon this production company or upon this movie cinema or beyond this what junior high school, whatever. Therefore, we're going to back off. And the lines, just as much as Trump came into office behind everything going on in Charlottesville, this I think will be the new version. This is that flame they can use now to deliver Biden. And by they, I mean the media, the hard left, whoever you want to look at it, can deliver Biden and his administration now as the solution to the chaos of Trump. And now it can be that they can remove Trump. They don't want him to have to be president. Nancy Pelosi, there's not enough time on a calendar to impeach a president. But she wants to come about it by, first off, flexing new power, but second off, providing a level of comfort to what's going on. So if I have a problem, it's these secondary and tertiary level effects. Companies now canceling publications. Companies now not supporting. Big tech companies shutting down access. Because trust me, if they can do it to him, they can do it to anybody. And the thing about it that's interesting, that wasn't even my comment. That was Emily Radziatowski, the model and actress. Very wise woman. But what I'm getting at, who I think I disagree with a lot of other parts though. But anyway, what I'm getting at is I think when we consider the secondary and tertiary effects, it's very easy to step back when you look at Charlottesville and just say, good people on both sides, that's it. This is what he meant and it's over. Everything can be taken out of context. Everything can be done. And this, I think, is the new one. If you think that any of these people being angry enough to storm the Capitol because in their mind they thought they were protecting the rights, liberties of freedom, then it is only because you are a secessionist, you support insurrection, you're a racist. I think to reduce people, to reduce situations, and to reduce the complexities that are needed to have an honest conversation about why people do things, that undermines our argument. But there are a lot of the channels, and this I will say, and I'm going to make a very definitive point when I say this. The left, the Democrat Party, and in conjunction with the media, has a very firm hold on the cultural apparatus and the social apparatus of our country. When you look at those channels, the media, universities, government, parts like this, there's overwhelming presence of being pushed in that direction. I would find it hard for people to justify to me that Hollywood studios have an overwhelming right-leaning conservative bent. I challenge anyone listening to the show right now to provide any evidence that that exists. So the counter to that, because our show is founded upon good debate, good discussion, and asking our fans to engage in providing solutions. What I'm seeing pop up is that you're seeing independent production now. So companies like the Daily Wire, owned by Ben Shapiro, is putting out its own release. They're creating people so that you can get away from things like Netflix, YouTube, Google, whatever, because there has to be an alternate channel. Because just as much as people feel they're being inundated with identity politics and beliefs that they don't support, they don't have anywhere to go. I remember a while back feeling like, I'm really bored on Facebook. It's just people yelling at each other. And Facebook feels kind of stale. I don't know what most of you out there feel, but Facebook feels really stale. I feel like it's a great place to share recipes with your cooking club. It's no longer Mark Zuckerberg, this kid creating this website in college. It doesn't have that feel of exclusivity. It doesn't have that feel of anything. It feels stale. It's where I go to remind me of people's birthday. That's what it is. So I thought, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. Oh, I'll go to Instagram.
Well, first of all, I'm glad I'm not the only one who uses Facebook to remember somebody's birthday.
Yeah, well, no, so the point that I'm getting at is I go and I like Facebook for that, because I want to shout out to all my friends on their birthday. That's important to me. But what I'm getting at is that I thought, okay, I'm going to get off of Facebook. Instagram seems like it's kind of more about pictures and fun. This is great. Till you find out 5 seconds later, of course, Instagram is owned by Facebook. So, I'm robbing Paul to pay Peter. But what I'm getting at is
now you got birthdays and low-level porn.
You've also got people that are, let's be honest, these are designed platforms to show, people, living on vacation. It's your best self. Everybody's skydiving or at brunch all the time, evidently. But what I'm getting at is, I think that very rarely are we ever in a position where there is such an event that A, there hasn't been a massive pressure building behind it for years, and B, when we don't consider the secondary and tertiary effects of what's going on, it becomes very dangerous, because our dialogue then breaks down into just talking points. It's just, you're a this. Oh, yeah, well, you're a this. And I think that hasn't gotten us anywhere. That hasn't gotten us anywhere. And and until we have those discussions and those topics, and the concern that I have as one of my last comments here is that one of the ways that you can see people want to bring about stability and security is through the evaporation of individual liberty.
So, first of all, I want to push back on one thing you said, which is that when you said, because the discourse has very much become, well, you're this and you're that, and it hasn't gotten us anywhere. That's incorrect. It's gotten us right where we are, which is honestly on the edge of some form of some really ugly things. And people have been talking about, there's such a thing as normalcy bias. We expect everything that's happened and that will happen in the future will look like it did in the past. And that's just not the way the world works. The world grows, the world evolves. We are in 5th generational warfare right now. The 5th generational war is about information. It's about the flow of information, and it's about the manipulation of information. That's where we're at. So Salty One points out that where the challenge espouse no political, here's the thing, this is what everyone wants. We don't want news with a political bent. We want news. So, and that brings me back to a comment. I forget who made it. Let me scroll up. So, it was Salty. Do we even have the ability for long-term discourse? We absolutely do. In fact, that's the point. People like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan. I'm not equating the two, but Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Tim Pool. What's his name? Ruben. These are all people who are on Spotify. They're on YouTube, and they go for hours. People will go for hours to listen to Jordan Peterson talk and to do these debates with Sam Harris. And I think the simple fact of the matter is people actually do want information. They want to have these arguments fleshed out. The problem is the news media has for so long assumed that that's giving them too much credit. The argument from the news media has been that people don't have the attention span for it. I think people absolutely do. Now, do you actually have to be interesting and know what you're talking about? Yeah, you do. I think that's a big thing, a big piece that's been missing. But I do think people do want that. They want actual facts. They want actual news. And the problem is everyone has lost credibility to one side or the other. There's no one who maintains credibility. The first person who can show up with real credibility on any topic wins. Straight up. If you can show that you have credibility, you win. Right now, there's no unifying credible source of information or conversation. And that I think stems to this whole thing. I want to mention a quote I ran across today. I thought it was just very appropriate, and I may have actually closed out the quote. I did, because I'm a genius. I can pull it up real quick again, but it's from. Hold on, let me open this. It was from Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. He has this quote, and I thought it very much tells us where we are. He said, "In a very real sense, we are all aliens on a strange planet. We spend most of our lives reaching out and trying to communicate. If during our whole lifetime we could reach out and really communicate with just two people, we are indeed very fortunate." I think as a society, this is where we're at. We used to be able to have conversations with one another because there was someone out there in the room who could essentially mediate this, who could provide information in a way that was not just accessible to people, but people could trust it. We don't have that anymore. We are literally alternative facts. I think was one of the greatest thing ever created as far as a phrase goes. I wish people had actually fought with it more, because the phrase, for me at least, the way I looked at it is alternative facts are the facts that the mainstream news media simply refuse to acknowledge exist. If I walk into a room and I've got two kids fighting, and I simply ignore the fact that one of the kids was throwing, hot chocolate on the other kid deliberately, and I punish the other one, like, if I'm ignoring half the facts, I'm not creating a fair and equitable conversation to be had between these two kids. That's the problem. We no longer have someone who's going to look at all of the facts and present us with context and present us with an unbiased view of the situation to allow us to work out the differences. We're all going to have different interpretations of the facts. Look at any archaeological dig. You will find as many archaeologists that are out there. You'll find an opinion for it. But they can all at least look and say, these are the facts as known. These are all these are the measurements. These are the weights. We get all this, but they're going to argue about the interpretation. We don't even have that. We have people cherry picking the material, and half the crowd knows that material is cherry picked, and the other half either doesn't know that it's been cherry picked or doesn't care that it's been cherry picked because it goes with their assumptions and biases. Now, I'm sorry, do you have something?
No, I just wanted to say, I mean, I think that everyone's raising good questions that I think we all want to see. I happen to hold the perspective without trying to give my resume. That's not what's important. But having studied it and worked with some of this for a while, my thought is simply this: I don't believe that exists. I don't believe it exists because we're humans. I don't think there is such a thing as being unbiased, and because we all see colors in our own. We may all see purple, but we're going to see our own shade of it. The question is it to the service and the welfare of the story or that of the cause? The reason I think a lot of people struggle when they see, well, wait a minute, Black Lives Matter had a riot that went on for a month or months and had these damage, and there was hundreds of millions of dollars and people killed and all this happened. And wait a minute, why this double standard? And I think it's because many times people look at things by saying they justify the cause, or they justify the riot, or they justify the protest, whether or not they identify with the cause. So it's not, hey, rioting is bad, looting is bad, shooting is bad, robbing is bad, killing is bad. It's a little caveat with, yeah, but if it's for something that I believe in, well, maybe it's not as bad. I mean, you can look at the comments that someone like Don Lemon or Chris Cuomo or whoever has made about differing views, because what they're doing is they're aligning with where they think it's okay, and they're changing the standard. It's not rooted in rioting is bad. It's rioting is bad, but it might be necessary for some people. And so that's why there's this difference. If we can't find a common ground on that, then you're going to have that shifting. And that's why I think there's a bias that you're going to find in humans, because their lens on it is different. Now, I also think that we live in the age of infotainment. We've all been locked up in our houses. So we've been watching the news and the political theater that's been going on like the world's greatest dinner at medieval times. It's basically been the highest, the most engaged reality show since, the Bachelor the Bachelor reunion. That's what I think that we're seeing. I do want to take 2 quick seconds to give a shout out to our wonderful fans and our loving family listening tonight from Florida. I got a chance to check in, and we want to welcome them to the show, and we're very glad that they're here. But I do want to say, another thing that I think is interesting to consider with regard to this topic of being able to find, news outlets. I think that's the opportunity that we have. We have an opportunity now to disengage ourselves from what has been a mass society and turn more towards a network society. So we have these chances now. We have chances now that we can sit back and engage or create or whatever. The problem is you're going to look for credibility. And I don't just mean credibility from bias, but credibility in terms of capability and news resources to get in there. You may have heard me on the show use Bill Paley's name, one of the news directors at CBS years ago, or Don Hewitt with 60 Minutes. People that were, people that could bring in that credibility. I think the model has changed so substantially that we are now going to go to channels to find those different outlets, which brings us back to that initial concern that many people have, and that is with big power, big tech out there suppressing access to some of these shows. Steven Crowder is someone who has a show that is very, very, it's almost been known through notoriety about its capacity to keep getting deplatformed and demonetized and everything through YouTube. And they try to find reasons as to why. Where is he in violation? And there's always a way to do it, because what we've done is we've monetized news, we've monetized the internet. We're going to monetize and politicize space. We're going to do what we can to push back and always have access to free and honest debate and discussion. But I don't mean to, for anyone that knows me, they know that I always want to find the silver lining in any situation. And I hope this doesn't sound negative when I say it, but just to be honest, I don't think a pure lily white unbiased approach can happen from news, because it's made from human beings, and human beings, let's not use the word are biased. Let's use the word, they have a preference. They have choices. We make decisions, and those decisions, all of us think we're in the middle. I don't know any of us that are like, oh, I'm hard to the left. And if they do, they say it because it's a perspective that they're getting from somewhere else. They're relatively using a scale. Alex, I've known you 20 years. I think anybody who knows you would say that if they had to identify you, you're more of a conservative. You're more on the right. Okay, great. I don't think you wake up and go, I am so to the right. You have your political perspective. So I think it's important that we rationalize first to ourselves and then to each other the ability to say, okay, we all have a bias. We all have a preference. But are we going to use ad hominem attacks with one another, or are we going to bring that color to the story? Because that color to the story is necessary, because it can create engagement and interest and provide backstories. When you think about news coverage in sports in particular, would you listen to a show, if you think about your average sports show, would you listen to a show where the broadcaster got on and said, the Red Wings played the Blackhawks tonight in a hockey game and beat them 3-2?
Well, first of all, I don't listen to sports at all, so
right. But what I'm saying is that if you let's say, I'll leave it like this:
there's no way you could jazz up that sentence that would make it interesting at all.
Well played, teammate. Let me say it like this: when Secretariat won the Triple Crown by 31 links and broke every record that's ever been held, and is to this day still holds it, I'm convinced the horse didn't have a heart; he had a Ferrari engine inside of him. But the point that I'm getting at is, could you imagine if it were covered like this? There are a bunch of horses, and one of them is in the front, and he's going faster, and he's beating the other horses. All right, he won. So what I'm getting at is that color can be necessary, it can be fun. Now, it shouldn't apply to altering facts. That's inaccurate, that's dangerous. But to me, as we've talked about infinitely on this show, fake news is a narrative tactic. It's a way of suppression. It's a way of hiding things. It's not just technical and narrative inaccuracies. So I want there to be what our fellow listeners. I very much agree with. I think Curtis McDonald was bringing a good point. You know, where do you go to find this middle of the road? You know, do this and whatever happened to normal people. I like that. The first question then has to become who's considering whom normal. But what I want to get at is, I don't know. I think the pendulum is always swinging. You know, once the pendulum stops, time doesn't move. But what I'm getting at is that I think it's important that those channels, regardless of the color or preference that we bring naturally as humans, that we still pursue the truth. And right now, what we have is that there is and I think people would agree with this, regardless of where you're sitting, the overwhelming presence, the overwhelming access, the overwhelming support, and the overwhelming capability to bend and present, and I hate to say it that way, but to bend and present narrative is overwhelmingly on one side. So maybe by simply creating more access on the right, you will pull that pendulum back to the middle. I don't know. I really don't know. But I think it's critically important that we recognize that there is not only a gap and that there are things we can do. I don't know. I'll throw this question out to our listeners. To the team listening tonight, both near and far, how many of you support alternative media? How many? And if you wouldn't mind, would you write in the comments section a couple of those outlets that you use? Do you read, you know, other perspective channels? What are they, other than the big three networks or the AP or something like that? What are some channels that you utilize? Do you engage in alternative media platforms so we can discuss and see what you guys come back with? Are there websites? Are there alternative media producers you follow? Are there authors that you like? Where can people go? Let's look at addressing this question. Where can people go?
So we finally come to that point where I wanted to be, like, at the 15-minute mark.
Oh, tonight's show is going to go long. I've just accepted it. I mean,
about 10 minutes in, we
turned the Capitol into a jungle gym. I mean, we're gonna talk it out tonight.
Oh no, I figured it at that point. I gave up all hope in that about 23 minutes in. No, but we're finally to this point. This is why I entitled the episode "The Ashes of the Phoenix," because according to, by the way, Mr. Dinicle, yes, Epic Times, they are amazing. They even have a YouTube page as well. It's Just the Facts. But yeah, the Epic Times is great. That's a great one. Daily Wire Full Assembler, I think is great. But Full Access Member. Sorry, I completely misread that.
Actually, I want to give a shout out to our friend Steve. That's a better word. It says Accessember. That's fantastic. No, and we tease only because, trust me, I can't tell you how many times I've been on the internet and seen, you know, things and had trouble reading it. But yeah, I mean, back to your point.
So the reason I entitled it this way is because the legend of the Phoenix goes that when a phoenix was about to die, it would dive into a fire, be consumed by that fire, and then was reborn anew. I was listening to, there have been a number of right-leaning, because I think we need to fully realize that under Trump, the right is no longer conservative. It is necessarily politically conservative. It is now everyone who cares about freedom. It is now everyone who cares about freedom of speech, the ability to have full conversations. And so my thought, and a lot of people talk about it, said the Republican Party has died. That with the betrayal, that with what Pence did, they label it as a betrayal. With the actions of all these Republicans who we've been sending, you know, it's like once you got Trump up there doing all these things, it's like, why haven't y'all been doing this for the last 40 years? You've been saying that we've been sending you money for decades. We've been shelling out all this cash. We've been going on your cruises, but you've not actually fought for us. All it took was one person just kind of even having enough testicular fortitude to say, hey, how about we actually do this to achieve a lot of this stuff? And so to see them cave so completely, they just said, look, this Republican Party is done. it's over. It's dead. And for me, I'm okay with that because it means something new can arise. The first step, like you said, is fair, open media. How do we do this? How do we work instead of having these big three or four or five control all information? How do we decentralize it so that we can actually turn it into something that's useful, it's productive? How do we turn the Republican Party into something that's new and useful, or do we create a third party? Or is it not so much that we're creating a third party in so much as a new party voting block that says, we'd like to work with you Republicans, we'd love to caucus with you Republicans, but y'all actually have to get your game together. When you don't do it, we're not going to vote for you. So instead of conservative Christians and a bunch of others being just these loyal party members, you actually have to earn that vote. Instead of being told, hey, y'all got to hold your nose and vote for every lame weasel jellyfish that we're going to throw at you and you're going to like it, people actually say, no, I want someone who's going to fight and actually stand up for it. So do we do it that way? Do we create a whole new party? Does a new party need to evolve out of this new form of news media where we can actually break out and decentralize it? I don't know, but that's the conversation we're having. The travesty and heartbreak of yesterday for me is nothing more than an opportunity to build something new.
So a lot of good dialogue coming out of our comments tonight, and I want to thank everyone. First and foremost, to our friend Steve, friend of the show. You know we have to lay the tease on you there, brother. No, I all good things. Something that a salty one here brings. I wonder if that means out there somewhere there's a sweet one. I don't know, but he raises a good point. You know, by saying another problem is that in the pursuit of this truth on air, we have to look for something credible that we seek. Are we going to espouse our own beliefs? So I'm going to nerd out here for just a little bit. For those of you that listen to some of our early broadcasts, if you get a chance, for those of you on the Google machines and the computers out there, check out something called media dependency theory. And for the 5-second synopsis, media dependency theory is that which discusses on a mass communication plane basically what you just asked, a salty one, which said, do we seek out media that reinforces our own paradigms, our own beliefs, our own structures, and our own perspectives because it's comforting? Therefore, your conservatives are going to go to Red State, Town Hall, Breitbart, Fox, the certain parts of the Wall Street Journal, and your liberal side is going to go to MSNBC and CNN and places like that. Furthermore, I want to go to the question raised, if both sides won't bring us back to center. No, I don't know that it'll bring us to a center, because I think the center is always moving. The center is a relative point. But I do think it can bring about a level of, for lack of a better word, maybe balance with access to information. And let me explain that. Many times when I will read stories, I will notice, Breitbart in particular is one that I've noticed seems to be a hot button. If I have friends here in Austin, Texas, that I would very much say are liberal progressive. And you use
a liberal progressive in Austin?
It's hard to believe. It's something that I'll have a conversation with them, and you use the word Breitbart, and you can just watch their left eye just starts uncontrollably twitching. Now, I use that to simply say that if it's something like Breitbart or what have you, many times I've noticed that Breitbart would provide coverage to stories that I couldn't find other places. Now, if you want to align that with, again, fake news or whatever you want, you're making a website is only so big. It's just like in the old days of the paper. There's only so much surface area that you can cover every story on. But it determines what they find is important. And I'm willing to bet that if you guys wanted to do a very quick analysis and a very quick comparison, go on the home pages. You can do it right now. It'll be overwhelming how you see it. But watch how the coverage is being presented with regard to the Capitol riots between CNN, Breitbart, and the Wall Street Journal. Okay, and just see how they're being presented. So to a salty one, I don't know that it brings us to a center, because I think that's a relative point, but I do think it creates a balance with hope. I'm being very idealistic in this. Hope, or hopeful, I should say, optimistic in this, that it creates access in a balancing manner to certain stories, which again, in my own experience, I have found there are times I have gone to search for a story on something and I physically can't find it because the production and the producers of that website and of that news outlet haven't deemed it something they're going to put on their website. So that's what my hope is. To your point, sure. If there's just a bunch of more websites, I mean, it's a self-licking ice cream cone, right? It's just further down the rabbit hole. Okay, great. Now we have as many websites on the right as there are on the left. Okay, well, now you've got to read twice as many websites to get the full story. What I would like to find is a hard news release that just comes out. And really, outside of AP and Reuters, you're not going to see that. And those are companies that are getting paid for their news stories anyway. I remember being in film school, and I had one of my very first days in class. And I had a gentleman who was a great guy. He was of Japanese descent, who had worked and had all types of connections all over the place. Great guy, really liked his class. And he came into us and he's like, guys, let me make something abundantly clear for you. I'm putting words in his mouth on this part by saying news is a commodity. But what he was teaching us, what we were talking about, is his example was, if I have a story about a rebellion taking place in Darfur, or Rwanda or somewhere when those weren't in the news that way, some sub-Saharan Africa country. And he said, or if I have a businessman, I'll never forget this example. He said, or if I have a businessman, this was the part that he said, who cut himself shaving, because of the readership and the coverage and the pickup and the ability for it to map onto the audience reading and the readership present, I'm going to go with the story in Japan. And it showed pre-internet mapping. I'm not going to acknowledge how old I am, but it's going to acknowledge how those stories were tracking. And they're going to the biggest audience. Well, what the internet has done is it's allowed us to disconnect from that mass audience. The days of Walter Cronkite coming on the news at 6 p.m. and everybody sitting around the television to watch the Apollo 11 moon landing are gone. We're now networked. We can watch things. First off, we don't have to watch them tied to any schedule. We can watch them on our own timetable wherever we choose. And secondly, we can now find producers. To a Salty One's point, we can now find producers who, full acknowledgement, that are going to produce products that people are going to feel more drawn to. But that is because I think what we've also done is we've entered a realm where everything is politicized everywhere. Senator Marco Rubio gave a speech that I thought was interesting when he was on the floor of the Senate. And he was speaking, and he said, America is not its government. It's its people. It's its culture. It's the people we love, the traditions we have. And that's what I think we've gotten far away from. Every hill everywhere is something people feel like they need to die on all the time. And my concern, if I may share with all of you tonight, is that I think it's going to get substantially worse. And the reason not worse, hopefully in a violent sense, I pray that doesn't happen, but in a sense that one party now has carte blanche in a lot of ways to push a lot of a social agenda that many people are going to feel like they reject. I'll provide one quick example and kick it back to Alex, and I'm very interested in Alex's response to this and all of yours. And it is this: regardless of where any of us may stand on this, just gameplay this thought out. You pass laws with regard to anti-discrimination, which I think any of us would want to, of course, make sure that we have those discussions. Absolutely, it's important. It's fundamentally important to the idea and the beauty of what our country is. But then you pass things that start to breach upon ideas and ideologies and teachings of things like Christian schools or Muslim schools. Then you have the government saying, you're teaching something that's in direct violation of this federal law. And then they start bringing the full weight and consequence of the federal government upon small Christian schools that have no capacity to fight against that kind of resource. I find it amazing that 200, and here we're crossing the longest running single governed democracy, and we are crossing into our third century, getting close to, we are within the third century of our government, which put the protection of faith and speech as its very first principled protection. And here we are entering our third century on this, and we're still debating these to this level. It's like our founding fathers knew something. It's like they drew from history and they saw things going on. So again, I kick it back and say to you, Alex, do you see this social pressures, phenomenon, cultural shift? Do you see this happening? And do you see there being pushback? And how do we resolve through that?
So, firstly, to answer your question, yes, do I see it? Absolutely. But it's been going, the problem is it's actually been going on for a very, very long time. But what it's been is death by a thousand cuts, right? And so you have the, it's the baker who says, hey, I don't believe in making this particular cake, but you can go down here. Well, they don't want to. And then what you realize is the people who actually bring the lawsuit, they don't actually care about the cake. They just want the excuse to sue this one Christian baker. You have one group go after the mayor of Houston goes after several churches, very specifically saying that we want all the text of all your sermons so we can determine if you've been political, right? And it's only certain very specific churches. The IRS does not give tax deductible status to certain groups because they are conservative or Christian and go towards a particular thing. So this has already been happening. But what's happened now is we've got a left that is no longer trying to even act like they care about the opinions of others. There's just the agenda. There's just moving forward. A great example of this was, like you said, the anti-discrimination laws, right, or concepts. Tim Pool, there's this very famous thing where Tim Pool and Jack Dorsey of Twitter are basically having this conversation on Joe Rogan's podcast. And one of the things that I can't remember if this happened on air or if it's a story that's told off air. One of the things that Tim Pool was trying to explain to Jack Dorsey was, was that a lot of these anti-discrimination rules they were coming up with were in themselves biased and discriminatory. And he said, no, we're trying to do away with discrimination. And he's like, we don't want people to discriminate by gender or sexual orientation or whether or not you think you're a male or female. And he points out, he's like, but Jack, that's the entire problem. Your idea of what non-discrimination is an ideological concept that's not endorsed by half the country. We are coming to a group of people who today, and they did some last night, but definitely today, they've called for the expulsion of Republicans from the Congress and the Senate. We are dealing with people who have actively called for violence against Christians and against conservatives for years now, and now they have unbridled power. 20 years ago, those on the left I would argue, many of them wanted the same things that we're seeing today, but they were willing to be peaceful about it. They were willing to negotiate. They were willing to talk. We are beyond that now. And that's why I think this new phoenix of a political ideology, of a political party, has to rise now. It has to do better than the Republican system did of old, because the Republican system of old got us where we are because they were trying to be nice instead of trying to be good. The American people have a voice. And I want to go back to what you were mentioning earlier, and I'll call it. I was Anderson Cooper who said that. I have no problem calling him out. So much of what's going on is class warfare.
Agreed.
That's what this is. And it's not class the way it's normalcy bias. There's essentially two different classes. There's those who make their money off the government and those who make their money, in the actual economy. Those who make their money off the government, and that is the news and entertainment business, that's big tech, that's most attorneys now, right? They are statists. And those people who make their money off the government and through government contracts, things like this, the industrial military complex that we've talked about, but now it's even bigger and broader than that, because now we're in fifth generational warfare where Google is just as valid a weapon as a Moab. They believe that
nice reference, by the way, for our Air Force fans out there. That's going to be some major points.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, but this is, and I think we should probably end on this since we're an hour and 5 minutes into this 30-minute show. But
You know what? If we push a little long tonight, that's fine. You know what? If people listen, they will. I think it's. I think the important part of what we bring is just a conversation with our fans and one another. I'm happy to listen. I've enjoyed everyone's contribution.
First of all, I love the fact that you call them fans because we have tolerators. Let's be honest.
No, the thing really about it is, I think I want to say to everybody out there, I get more out of this than I think I put in. I love listening to the contribution, so I'm here to learn.
We know that's not. but back to
good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. But no, so here's the problem. This is what the two classes are. There's the government class, which is not just those who work for the government, those whose jobs are dependent on the government. And then you have taller fans. I like that. And then you have those who work in the real economy. The problem is we have been for very slowly, and now it's very rapidly creating a system where those who work in the real economy are serfs. That is why they want to destroy the things like the Electoral College. If you do that, then the people who make the cars, who make the products, who grow the food, we all become serfs in this thing. We all become serfs with no voice. And here's the problem. We don't have a voice now. We know we don't have a voice. It's obvious. We have credible, again, so this is for Facebook's and YouTube and all their algorithms. I don't know whether or not the amount of fraud and cheating and miscounting and the chickens that were voting, actual literal chickens that were voting were enough to sway the election one way or the other.
Chickens are a very tough group to poll.
They are. They
really are. And in the last election, I heard that they really laid an egg.
I was going to say they're really hard group to pull it.
By the way, if I can jump in really quickly, I just want to say we have the best fans in the world, or as Steve Buck is calling them, taller fans. It's a balance, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of like
taller fan.
It's kind of like your kids at times. Like, you don't want to say you have a favorite, but mom and dad, you probably have a favorite, don't you? And that's fine. That's totally fine. I get it. I just think that it's interesting to see how I'm jumping in real quickly on this because I think it comes down to a point that the Salty one made. He says that we don't know our history any longer. And you're talking about the concept of having a voice. If I see a danger in here, you know what it is? It's that there are 52 million pages you could Google right now if you were to put in Trump voting conspiracy. So the question is, has granting access to everybody now having a voice somewhere, has it now actually delegitimized having a voice?
Well, so this goes back to so I'm going to answer that. I'm going to go back to my point. That's sort of the problem. Everyone's like, we want to go back to the day of, I just forgot his name. You brought him up. The guy with the voice.
Yes, he was tremendous.
Walter Cronkite. Sorry, Walter Cronkite. Everyone's like, we want to go back to the day of Walter Cronkite, where there was one person giving us the straight news, and it was unbiased. Guys, Walter Cronkite never gave straight news. He was as bad an opinion man as there ever was. That's the big lie. There's never been objective journalism. It's never existed. It may have been less bad than it is now, where we have an entire news media that's straight up making crap up, or ignoring things that are happening in front of their face. But he was never actually a straight shooter. And this goes back to what I'm saying. There's two classes here: those who work for a living and those who know they're going to get cash no matter what happens because they're latched onto the government teat. That's the problem. And the people who actually work for a living, they don't have a voice. We know this. Again, I go back to whether you think it happened or not. The fact is, there's reason to believe that there is at least something worth looking at in the 2020 elections, and the FBI, Department of Justice, and the Supreme Court, the State House, nobody's looking into it at all. They're saying, hey, we have a legitimate concern. We would like to at least have it adjudicated. It doesn't happen. We have a lot of things out here where where people like us just don't have a voice. Our businesses are being shut down. The woman whose diner was shut down, but because they're like, well, you spent these thousands of dollars making yourself COVID compliant, but we're going to shut you down anyway. 50 feet from her restaurant are rows after rows after rows of craft tables where Hollywood, where this Hollywood production is going to just sit down and eat shoulder to shoulder. The government is picking and choosing, and they're picking those in the club, and they're getting rid of us, those of us who work in the real world. What we are seeing right now in the age of COVID is the greatest theft of and transfer of wealth from the middle class to the upper class that has happened in the history of the planet. And that's not me overstating things. That is an actual fact.
I will state that I have struggled in talking to my friends that work in and around finance by asking them, does the stock market not know that there's a global pandemic and now that there's going to be an administration that tends to favor, I mean, Democrats, I don't think anyone would argue on this. Democrats are kind of known for your tax and spend type government perspective. There's going to be things that they're going to implement that are going to, follow some of those paths. And you look at the market, you would think nothing's wrong. And to your point, I think that's what's interesting. That redistribution of wealth, if you will, coming from small businesses going to corporations. Apple stock's never been higher. Tesla. Yep. Elon Musk just became the wealthiest man in the world. I have no idea what's driving it. Excuse me.
Oh, I can tell you. Oh, I can tell you. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and so what I would say is, again, when we talked earlier about the concept of providing security through loss of liberty, and that's what you're seeing here in Austin. I can tell our listeners that from around the country, here in Austin, you've got a mayor who's putting out guidance in contradiction to what the governors and the state law is saying. They're talking about businesses only operating at certain percentages, and the governor's saying, no, that's not right. So again, there's this conflict even at those levels. And I think one thing I want to jump in here on is, in this time, it's funny because as locked up as we've been, I feel like I've actually talked to some of my friends and family well more than I ever would have before. Alex, I'm sure you're ready to bang your head against a desk as to how much we've spoken. But when I have conversations with my family, and I've had wonderful conversations with my father and my stepmother, and in particular, my uncle and I have grown exceptionally close to this time because I think, ideologically we align on a lot of things, and I see his perspectives because he's bringing me that of a loving uncle, wisdom and guidance and patience and friendship. But when I listen to him, he'll raise questions of concerns that he has. And when I talk to him, one of the things I say that I struggle with is that as his nephew, I don't like to think that my father, my uncle, my loved ones are in a position where politics are affecting them this much. And it's not because, they're weak and that you've got to be so hard to be in politics, but rather they're just trying to live their life. But everything seems to be turned up to 11 all the time, everywhere, and that kind of pressure placed upon people. I don't want that near my family. I don't think any of our listeners want that near our family. So whether we try to educate ourselves through reading as much news as possible, as Denzel Washington, quipped once, I thought was fantastic. He said, look, you either don't read the news and you're uninformed, or you do read the news and you're misinformed. And I thought that was very powerful because, again, speaking to my family and making this to share this with you guys and the entire internet, my family is, spread out geographically. We haven't seen each other, and we love and miss each other. I'm sure most of yours are in the same situation. But the amount of impact that this has. I mean, I had a conversation with my father, and I could just hear the frustration. And for those of you out in the audience that know my father, that was a force to be reckoned with. When to him he sees his country under assault in many ways, socially, personally, economically, politically. It's something that he was very protective of. And I thought, I don't want my dad worked too hard his whole life to get to a point to have to worry about this. My uncle is a loving, kind man who just wants to be near family. It's my favorite thing about him. All he wants to do is be around family, and making decisions of, he wants to be as responsible as possible because he's a very accountable person. And the fact that he has to have these extra burdens. And by the way, guys, I don't think that my family is alone in this. I think many of you are out there. And I thank God that I have these loving family members to help get me through this stuff. And we talk about stuff. But, we try to comfort each other like I'm sure all of you do. But just how, Alex, you once said a long time ago, how dare we have where we have failed is we have allowed it. You get what you tolerate. How dare we have allowed politics to overtake our lives in such a way? They work for us.
Well, and for me, you're going to appreciate this, Nick. The problem is, and this is a summation of, I think, the entire episode, we actually haven't allowed politics to come in between us in so much as we allowed politicians to play politics with our lives. Politics is supposed to be.
Womp.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Roll credits. All right.
But no,
that's the marketing budget that we have on this show, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to do the whole theme song thing. I have my daughter who's probably going to do this whole thing on her iPhone and email it back to me and be like, "What was wrong with that, Dad? Like, what was so hard about that?" But politics is supposed to be the tool we use to build a house we all live in. And it's not. Politics has become the game that we distract ourselves with to make us think we're actually doing something. There is I won't even mention the rapper, but there's a song that where there's one of the big lines is congratulations I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's congratulations everyone, activism saved the planet. We no longer have plastic straws wrapped in paper. We only have paper straws wrapped up in plastic. Congratulations.
That's fantastic. I like
it's
that's really good.
So, it's one of his best lines. But here's the thing. That's exactly where we're at. It's a game. It's red versus blue. Literally red versus blue. That is when these, I can't believe esports is a thing now, but they actually have the red team and the blue team and they fight it out. It's red versus blue. That's the world that we're living in. And guess what? The problem with games is is that there's always another game to play. There is no resolution. There's only the next season. There's only the next thing to go out to because you're only as good as your last game. There's no there's nothing that actually moves forward. We have to rethink this Phoenix event needs to be something that allows us to rethink our entire outlook on politics. So that's actually about doing things and actually moving us forward and resolving situations instead of simply watching the talking heads yell at each other, calling themselves this and that on the tube, on the idiot box. The 24-hour news cycle is idiotic when you realize they only talk about 3 stories the entire day. Like a 24-hour news cycle, I should be able to know what's going on in China, Japan, Korea. I should understand the market. I should understand what's going on in Antarctica with some penguins that are having a slap fight. But no, in 24 hours, I know 3 stories. Because that's all we get. We get it if it bleeds, it leads. Actually, you may know this, Nick. The movie Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal, where it's a guy who goes out, he needs cash, and he ends up doing, they call it night crawling, where you're going out and you're finding video and film and photos of what happens at night. And he discovers that the worse, the more terrible things are, the more money he makes, the more people want to buy his stuff. So he starts staging things. He starts, like it's a real event that occurs, but he moves the body to get a better picture, a bloodier picture. He's going to the worst neighborhoods to find the worst violence. Then eventually it ends up with him actually orchestrating the events themselves, so he can be first on the scene to get the best gruesome bloody pictures of people walking out of a crash or something. That is the state of our media. Conservative, liberal, in between, up or down. That's the state of our media, and that is being used by people playing politics with our lives so that they can get cash, and we don't actually realize that we're not doing anything. We're just being manipulated into ignoring the fact that we're $30 trillion in debt. We're not even borrowing against our grandchildren or great grandchildren. We're borrowing against the entire concept of money. And that's where we are. And that is, and we've allowed this to happen because we did not take the responsibility on ourselves. And this is really where I'm coming to. An hour and 20 minutes into this conversation, we can no longer, we can't just vote people into office and just be like, well, why are those bums doing bad things? That can't be it anymore. We have to be more accountable. We have to actually do things. We have to educate ourselves. Now, that goes back to, however, trying to create a way to educate ourselves cohesively and in a way that's productive, where we can trust people whose opinions matter, and that we can sort of work this stuff out. We need to develop a system to actually have conversations, because you know what? Yeah, you're right. I am right. In fact, I mean, I'm on the right-hand side, although I do think I'm probably right most of the time anyway. But no, I mean, I'm so right, I get out of the right side of the bed. I only make right turns. I use my right hand. But I also understand that sometimes that gives me a blind spot. I need to be able to look to someone to the left and say, what are you seeing in the situation? Listen to their point. They need to be able to listen to my point, and then we need to be able to come to a resolution. And that's not a system we have now, but I think it's a system we can develop by doing things like having these conversations. I think we can, as we build the audience here, our taller fans, we can build a community that's willing to have these conversations and take that conversation to the broader world, so we can actually get past this stupidity and actually get back to a country that functions for all of us, not just those who have symbiotically joined themselves with this leviathan of a government.
Well, I will wrap my thoughts tonight. Excuse me, with a thank you to our fans, with a thank you to our family members, and simply say this. It's, they say that victory goes to those who believe in it the most, but believe in it the longest. It can't be a victory if it's over our own fellow countrymen. I think it's a victory now that we have to share in a unifying way of pulling us together and pulling us forward towards what used to be common themes in our culture. We used to have the Pledge of Allegiance, or standing for the flag, or saying Merry Christmas, or whatever. And as these things start to destabilize, we have to find new ways to identify. I think that's what people do. I think people in their hearts want to belong to things. I just think we have to find a way to reintroduce and welcome people back to those. One of the favorite lines of all time for me is, preach the gospel daily, when necessary, use words. And I think that when we create a society, and I do believe that the United States of America is, as my beloved uncle once said, he said, people have to remember, America is not a destination, it's an idea. It's a concept. I wish everyone a seat at the table to share in the beauty of the rarity of what this country really is. It was not founded by perfect men. It did not have everything figured out, but it tried to lay the foundation for a government that could be self-sufficient, that could be independent, that could be clear, that could be representative of the people. And I hope that that works. And I think that as long as we continue to fight for and preserve our country in an intellectual way, in a spiritually minded way, I think we can be on good footing. So I'm going to continue to consider a lot of this stuff. I'm going to take a lot of input from things tonight. A lot of people are putting out some good ideas. I want to thank them for all their contributions. Some of you guys are really witty, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. They're good. I want to thank you all. And Alex, it's great to be back. I'm so grateful that you had a wonderful holidays with your family, and I appreciate us getting to kick this off. I'm not always expecting it to be this colorful in terms of historical events. I would love to have one show where we're on for 12 minutes and all we talk about is our favorite color. But it seems like this has been a show that we have been provided a script that we can't seem to avoid. So,
I don't think that next week's episode is going to be any less amazing. Honestly,
not unless our luck changes and we end up talking about life being discovered on Mars and finding out that somehow there were improper ballots cast on Mars or something. But I do want to say that I think that we're I'm in this with you and with all of our friends and family out there. You know what? You start and you just see what you can do. You put a little row in the oar and you try to get it going. So I'll never give up or surrender the belief in the beauty and the idea of what this country can be. And I hope that we find those with us to continue the march.
Well, we appreciate all of you wonderful people, our new Tyler fans, and here's to a great 2021, regardless of what comes our way. And we will see you next week. And who knows? Maybe next week we'll find out that Trump is actually the president, and you know, and it'll be rainbows and lollipops, or maybe like you said, there'll be aliens found on Mars, and they're all going to be pissed off that we disenfranchised them because Dominion switched their votes or something. But it'll be fun. But you know what? Regardless of what happens, we will be here next week, same time. Hopefully, if we're not nearly as long, so you wonderful people can go to sleep. But we will be here, same time, same channel. Check us out on Parler. It's in the description below. Good night, everybody.
Peace and blessings. Be safe, guys.